City County Planning Commission, please come to order. The first thing that I would like to do this evening is to introduce to some and to welcome Sandy Clark. She was our newest commissioner and has been appointed to represent the Plum Springs neighborhood. So I would ask Mr. Moore if he would please swear her in.
You will stand and raise your right hand.
Certainly will.
Do you solemnly swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of this Commonwealth, and be faithful and true to the Commonwealth of Kentucky, so long as you continue a citizen thereof, and that you will faithfully execute, to the best of your ability, the office of City County Planning Commissioner according to law, and you do further solemnly swear that since the adoption of the present Constitution, you, being a citizen of this state, have not fought a duel with a deadly weapon within this state, nor out of it, nor have you sent or accepted a challenge to fight a duel with deadly weapons, nor have you acted as a second in carrying a challenge, nor aided or assisted any person thus offending, so help you God. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're glad to have you, Sandy.
Thank you.
Ms. Martin, you call the roll.
Yes, ma'am. Commissioner Rich?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Martins?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Balance?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Clark?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Coppinger?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Graham?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Vokert?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Gay?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Warren? Commissioner Madison?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Houston? Chair Runner?
Yes, ma'am. Everyone's had a chance to review the summary minutes of the April 5th meeting. If there are no corrections, I'd ask for a motion. Thank
Second.
you.
Commissioner Rich? Commissioner Martins?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Balance? Commissioner Clark?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Coppinger?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Graham?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Vokert?
Staying.
Commissioner Gay?
Ma'am.
Commissioner Madison?
Yes, ma'am.
Chair Runner?
Yes, ma'am.
Chairman Runner, I request that you order that the Warren County zoning ordinance, subdivision regulations, and the comprehensive plan with all of its elements effective as of this date be introduced as exhibits for each of tonight's hearings. I further request that you order that the staff reports, all attachments, together with the Commission's file for each application be introduced as exhibits. Finally, I ask that Ben Peterson as Executive Director, Rachel Hurt as Planner, Steve McWhorter as Plans Reviewer, and Monica Ramsey as Planner be sworn as witnesses before you, and that their oath and qualifications be reflected in the record for each hearing.
So ordered. Do you swear to tell the truth before this commission? I do. Thank you all. The March financial report was in the packet. Are there any questions on that report? Subdivision approvals, I think there were 14. Any questions on those? No questions. That brings us down to letters of credit and performance bonds. We have 3 items. Questions on those items? Nothing. Then I'd ask for a motion. Thank you. And a second. Thank you, sir.
Commissioner Rich?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Martins?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Balance? Commissioner Clark?
Yes.
Commissioner Coppinger?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Graham?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Vokert? Commissioner Gay?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Madison?
Yes, ma'am.
Chair Runner?
Yes, ma'am. First item tonight for public hearing is docket number 2018-05 DP Mulsham Holdings LLC has applied for approval of a detailed development plan on tracts of land containing approximately 20 acres located at 442 and 448 Century Street. The property is zoned heavy industrial with a general development plan, and we'll have the staff report from Mr. McWhorter.
Thank you, Chairman Runner. If you don't mind, if I can ask Ms. Martin, can you help me one more time with this, please? No, ma'am. And the keystroke button wouldn't work either.
Battery must be dead in it.
Okay. But then, like last night, we did that. Sorry for the delay. Thank you,
That's
ma'am.
quite all right.
As Mr. Runner alluded to, the applicants tonight are Mulsham Holdings. They are proposing a detailed development plan located at lots 22 and 23 of Century Street. As we have the aerial above us, it's going to be addressed 442 and 458 Century Street. The properties are currently zoned heavy industrial with binding elements, and the current land use is agricultural. This is the existing tract as is today, and this is our proposed lot layout. As on page 2 of our staff report, we'll see that section 311.5 of our zoning ordinance states that a detailed development plan is required prior to the issuance of building permits for all industrial developments or uses containing over 75,000 square feet. Tonight's application are proposing 2 phases. Phase 1 is 187,500 square feet of warehousing and storage space with a future expansion of 156,250 square feet for a total development of 343,750 square feet of warehousing and storage space for this site. Bottom of page 2 and the top of page 3 of our binding elements for this property. 2 binding elements I'd like to point out tonight are binding element number 6. The lot size, no property shall be smaller than 10 acres. Each of these lots are exactly 10 acres for a total development of 20 acres. And our building heights were restricted to buildings farther than 100 feet from McClellan Road shall be limited to a maximum height of 6 stories or 70 feet. And the applicants have met that requirement with both buildings being 1 story and 29 feet in height. Page 3 of our staff report, we've broken out each lot and reviewed them individually for our binding elements and our zoning ordinance. Lot 22 or 442 Century Street or Phase 1, they are well below the lot coverage of 67% and the 90% allowed. As we look at our parking, each lot will need, or each building will need 50 parking spaces. They are proposing only 6 spaces on actually lot 22, but as you can see, there's a lot line or a phase line that shows all the parking will be constructed at one time with Phase 1. So all 118 spaces will be provided with the building being constructed on the first lot. They are required to have 100 parking spaces, 50 employees per building. So they're going to put the first building in and then build all the parking. The landscaping plan for both lots have met the requirements of our zoning ordinance and the binding elements. No information was provided as to signage, but if that comes in at the time of a building permit, the site will be limited to 1 freestanding sign, no taller than 30 feet in height, and no more than 100 square feet in sign face. The drainage plan will be reviewed by the City of Bowling Green Public Works Department prior to the approval of a building permit, and no traffic impact study was required with this submittal. Our access points, as you can see, both lots will share 1 access point. This access point has been reviewed and approved by Mark Absher of Public Works. And also, we'll also do the same review for lot 23. We are below the lot coverage allowed for 90% at 60%, and the remaining parking spaces for the majority of the development will be on Phase 2 or lot 23 of this project. All lots, or both lots, meet the requirements of our zoning ordinance and our binding elements. And then I'll be happy to answer any questions, but our 2 suggested conditions of approval tonight: the drainage plan will be reviewed by the City of Bowling Green Public Works Department, and final approval will be required prior to the issuance of a permit. And our second condition also refers to our parking. Since we do have 1 development on 2 lots, a shared access and a cross parking easement for the use and benefit of lots 22 and 23 must be in a recordable document prior to the issuance of a permit. That could either be a revision to the plat, or we'll just need to get a recorded deed stating that both lots can share the parking and the cross-access easement to Century Street. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. McOrder.
Thank you, ma'am.
Commissioners, any questions for Mr. McOrder?
Yes, I have one question. You've got a 10-foot landscape. Is there any kind of provision for sound barrier? Because there's a neighborhood out there close. Is there any kind of sound barrier walls or anything going up to help protect that neighborhood?
No, ma'am, they just met the requirements of the zoning ordinance and the setbacks.
They're not thinking about the neighborhood?
Well, ma'am, they are in an industrial park, so they just met the requirements of the zoning ordinance and the binding elements.
Thank you. Any other questions, Commissioners? Anyone in the audience like to address this application? No questions? I ask for motion, please.
Make a motion to approve the detailed development plan docket number 2018-5DP, subject to the following condition. Drainage plan will be reviewed by the City of Bowling Green Public Works Department. Final approval will be required prior to issuance of a building permit. Shared access and cross parking easement for use and benefit of lot 22, 442 Century Street, and lot 23, 458 Century Street must be in a recordable document prior to issuance of a building permit. My motion is based upon a detailed development plan's compliance with Section 3116 of the Warren County zoning ordinance.
Thank you, sir. We need a second. Thank you.
Commissioner Rich,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Martins,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Balance, Commissioner Clark,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Coppinger,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Graham,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Volkert,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Gay,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Madison,
Yes, ma'am.
Chair Runner.
Yes, ma'am. And the motion carried.
Thank you, ma'am.
Next item, 2018-06 DP, JGL Properties LLC, Bishop Land Sales LLC, 7 Plus LLC, and 979 LLC have filed an application to amend the binding elements, the general development plan, on tracts of land containing approximately 33.06 acres located on 0 Nashville Road, bounded by McClellan Road, Mitch McConnell Way, and Century Street. The property is zoned highway business with a general development plan. And we'll have the staff report. Ms. Hurd.
Thank you, Chairman Runner. And I guess before we get started, I may direct your attention to the next item on the agenda as well. I know we did do 2 separate staff reports, but after kind of looking through everything, it may be easier if we kind of put them all together, but then vote on them separate, if that's okay with the commission.
That will be fine. That will be fine. I can go ahead and read the introduction for that item number 3. That will be docket number 2018-19ZBG. JGL Properties LLC has filed an application to rezone a portion of a tract of land containing approximately 5.87 acres located Nashville Road, bounded by McClellan Road, Mitch McConnell Way, and Century Street, from highway business with a general development plan to light industrial with a general development plan. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started here. We did have a pre-application meeting for these properties on March the 12th. The first application you're considering is an amendment to the binding elements, which I'm going to jump to the zoning map here. You can see that there are currently 4 tracts of land that are zoned highway business. They were rezoned to highway business in 1998 and have remained in that same zone since then. And I guess just to kind of summarize the proposed amendment to the binding elements, there's a request to amend the binding elements to develop the property with lots that are smaller than 3 acres. Also make a few changes to the landscaping and green space requirements. And also, if I guess we get to the light industrial zone change proposal here in a second, the proposed use for the property that would be on the far left-hand side of your screen, the proposed use for that property is self-service storage, which is a permitted use in the highway business zone. But there is a potential for some outdoor storage for things like boats and RVs and trailers, and that's what has necessitated the light industrial zone change request, because only that outdoor storage component would be permitted in the light industrial zone. So keep that in mind. I'll jump ahead and try to get to the proposed site layout here, just so you can kind of have an idea of how this would again be the lot just on the far left-hand side that I was just showing you, but the amendment to the binding elements that's proposed would be applicable to all of the highway business zone properties. So with that, I'm going to jump in to the rest of the staff report here, and I'm probably going to jump back and forth and skip over some things because they're identical from one report to the next. But I'm going to go ahead and look at the compatibility with the comprehensive plan section. There on page 1, I'm looking at the amendment to binding elements staff report. And I'll jump back to the future land use map here. So you can see the future land use map designation for this area is mixed use commercial. The proposed changes to the general development plan and the proposed zoning of light industrial are consistent with the mixed use commercial future land use designation. The Planning Commission should determine if the proposed changes to the binding elements and the proposed zone change are appropriate and if such changes are compatible with the surrounding area. The properties are located in the urbanized area of Bowling Green. A site characteristic review indicates that there are adequate facilities and infrastructure available to support the proposed development. Site design has been addressed for a portion of the property in the general development plan and in the binding elements in conjunction with the requirements of the zoning ordinance. The proposed general development plan amendment and zone change may be appropriate if the Planning Commission deems the proposal compatible with the surrounding area and finds that the proposed amendment to the binding elements remains consistent with the Focus 2030 Comprehensive Plan. I'll come back to our points to consider here in just a few minutes, but I am going to jump on to page 2, which looks at our future land use map and category review. Staff evaluated 9 goals, objectives, and action items from the Focus 2030 Comprehensive Plan, and we've provided a compliance summary of each of those items on page 2. The items that we evaluated were identical for both applications, with the exception of one, and I'll get to that in just a second. But we did look at future land use map compliance, compatibility of the proposed development with the surrounding area, quality of the proposed development, access to the property, the existing wetland on the property, the availability of infrastructure, and the only item that's different between the two, for the light industrial request, we did evaluate item ED-3, and the Planning Commission should determine if the proposed development is a small business and entrepreneurial endeavor. That was the only item, again, that was different. The other ones, you'll need to determine the compatibility with those other items. The only one that was not in compliance was NCR 1-3, because there were no provisions made to preserve the existing wetland that's on the property, which is located, I can jump back here to the map, to the aerial. It's kind of in this general area here. You can see that depression that's located there on the screen. With that, I'll jump onto our site characteristics review section, and I'll go back to the preliminary site plan here. The only thing, which I just pointed out, is the wetland that's located on the property. Otherwise, the application does generally comply with the majority of the items in the site characteristics review section. For site design and compatibility review, let me jump back to the existing land use map here. So there are a mixture of uses in the area. The majority of the area is agricultural to the south, and there are some single-family residential uses to the west there. You can see just north, as we had seen with the previous DDP, there's an industrial park located just to the north of the property there. There's a mixture of structure types, a mixture of 1- and 2-story structures. There are also a commercial structure and a greenhouse across from the development on Nashville Road. There are also industrial properties located closer to the southern intersection of Old Nashville Road Loop Number 2 and Nashville Road, which contain 1- and 2-story structures. The applicant has limited the building height to 2 stories in the binding elements for the light industrial portion of the request. However, if the light industrial zone change application is approved, the binding elements would only be applicable to the portion of the property proposed to be rezoned to light industrial. I'll have to get back to the amendment to the binding elements in just a second and go over specifically which binding elements they're proposing to change for the HB portion of the property. For the building materials review section, the surrounding homes are constructed of a mixture of brick and vinyl. There are nearby commercial and industrial buildings that are constructed of metal and masonry materials. Again, the applicants have addressed building materials for the proposed office building and fencing with the light industrial portion of the request, but these material restrictions would again only apply to the light industrial portion of the property. You'll note from the site plan that the proposed office is actually located in the highway business portion of the property. It's hard to tell, and I don't know if it's shown on here. Let me look in the packet here. It's hard to see on the screen. So the proposed the zoning line runs approximately kind of in this general area. So everything on this side of the screen would remain zoned highway business, and then everything at the back portion of the property is what we're looking to zone to light industrial. Moving on to connectivity, that's worth mentioning here. The applicants have committed in the binding elements that the development will be limited to a maximum of 2 access points to Nashville Road, which is US 31W, and that's actually for the entire portion of the property that's zoned highway business. So there would be 1 access point here, and that would be shared by these properties, and then there's another access point here, which if you look back at the site plan here, you can actually see there's an ingress-egress easement here that can be shared between this property, and there's kind of an internal road proposed that would serve the self-storage, this commercial out parcel, the proposed billboard lot, and then this easement would also remain to help serve this property here, which is not subject to either of the applications, but could still access that easement there. With that, I'm going to go over the binding element changes that are proposed. This would be on page 4 of the staff report for the amendment to binding elements. The proposed changes are shown in bold font. There are 3 that are proposed to change. Number 3 is proposed to be deleted. That deals with landscaping on the property, and actually that's kind of a cleanup because our zoning ordinance today requires more of a buffer than the binding element as currently written. So they're just proposing to delete that altogether and defer to the zoning ordinance requirements for landscaping. The number 5 there, you'll see the lot size. Right now, the binding elements, again, this is for the highway business, the 4 highway business tracks. The lot size minimum now is 3 acres, and they are proposing to remove that requirement altogether to allow the minimum lot size to default to the highway business zone, which is 5,000 square feet. And you'll see on the proposed site plan here, they are proposing one 5,000 square foot lot here. It would be for a billboard. And then there's another commercial out parcel proposed here that's just shy of 3 acres. They are also proposing to remove binding element number 7, which deals with green space. And there is an addition proposed to binding element 8, which deals with prohibited uses for the property. And they're proposing to also prohibit adult entertainment, tattoo parlors, bingo halls, and pawn shops, in addition to the other uses that are already prohibited. So again, those are the proposed changes. That would be for all of the properties designated as highway business, shown on the zoning map here. And then for the red outlined area, that's the area that's proposing to be rezoned to light industrial. The binding elements that are proposed for this portion of the development are on page 4 of your zone change staff report. Number 1 states that all utility improvements will be located underground. Number 2 states that the maximum building height would be 2 stories. Number 3, exteriors of any office building will be constructed with facades of at least 80% brick, stone, drive-it, cement-based siding, man-made stone, or other modern masonry material. Number 4, outside lighting and parking areas shall be directed downward and appropriately shielded to limit light trespass onto adjoining residential properties. Number 5, any chain link fencing on the property shall be coated with vinyl or a similar coating. And number 6, the following uses are prohibited: bingo parlor, pawn shop, tattoo parlor, adult entertainment, or any sale, rental, or display of pornography or adult books. The proposed general development plan and binding elements do meet a majority of the review criteria for site design. Compatibility of the proposed development should be determined by the Planning Commission, and if approved, the application would be subject to further review for compliance with the zoning ordinance requirements at the time a building permit was issued. With that, I'm going to jump back to our points to consider on the front page of both staff reports. And I'll go through the points to consider for the zone change first, and then I'll hit on the points to consider on the binding element amendment application. So the proposed zone change is consistent with the future land use map and the mixed-use commercial category. The proposed development complies with the majority of the site characteristics review criteria. The proposed general development plan generally complies with the majority of the review criteria for site design. The Planning Commission should determine if the proposed development is compatible. And the applicant has communicated to staff that there are plans for outdoor storage, as I mentioned earlier. That's what triggered the need for the light industrial zone change request. You will note on the site plan that was submitted, though, there's no outdoor storage component shown. I've been in communication with the applicants, and I believe their plan is to kind of phase the property to where they may build some indoor storage initially and still have the option for outdoor storage here. But over time, I think they hope to develop the entire property for indoor storage, but maybe having some flexibility in the meantime to have an outdoor storage component. The applicants are here. They can further elaborate on that. That's what I was told earlier on, but they'll need to verify that that's the case. The proposed binding elements include things for maximum building height, building materials, For the proposed office building, lighting, and fencing, again, if the application for the light industrial zone change request is approved, the binding elements would actually only be applicable to that light industrial portion of the property and not to the front portion of the property, which would still be bound by the binding elements that are proposed to be amended with the other application. So I'm going to move on to those points to consider. Similar to the proposed zone change, the proposed binding element amendment is also consistent with the future land use map and the mixed-use commercial future land use designation. The Planning Commission should determine if the proposed amendments are consistent with the comprehensive plan and compatible with the surrounding area. The proposed amendments include eliminating the minimum lot size requirement in order to create a billboard lot and additional commercial outparcel. The closest billboard to the subject property is approximately 3/4 of a mile northeast of the property, near the intersection of Nashville Road and Central Avenue. The Planning Commission should determine if billboards are appropriate in this particular area, given the current character and pattern of development along Nashville Road. The proposed amendment generally complies with the majority of the site characteristics review criteria, and it also complies with the majority of the review criteria for site design and compatibility, and meets the minimum requirements in the zoning ordinance. I believe that is all I have. I know that's a lot of information, and I may have confused some of you because it's a lot to take in, and I've had a hard time following it all myself. So if you'd like me to go back over anything, I'd be happy to, or if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, ma'am. Commissioners, do you have any questions or any points you would like for her to clarify for you? No problem. Do we have any questions from anyone in the audience? Oh, did you have a question, sir? I apologize.
Just quickly,
Yes.
will the applicant address, do you expect the applicant to address the removal of the green space, and then the buffering you said will revert to the, refresh my memory, what happens to the buffering?
The landscape buffer that's currently written in the binding elements it requires less than what our minimum is. So when they were adopted originally back in 1998, our zoning ordinance had a different standard, but we've since increased that. So by deleting it, they would have to default to the zoning ordinance today, because that's lesser of a requirement than what's currently in the ordinance. So they're just going to default to the zoning ordinance requirements, which is actually more than what the binding elements currently require.
Okay. The green space?
The green space, I'm not sure the reasoning behind removing that. They would have to explain their reasoning behind that. I really don't know why they're proposing to remove that, but I'm sure they'd be happy to answer that.
Let's do it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
They fencing the whole area?
The self-storage would be required to be fenced, just because the zoning ordinance, that's a requirement.
Not the whole?
No, I don't know about the plans for the commercial outparcel or the other, well, here we go. So the remaining portion of the highway business tracts, so these three here, I'm not sure of the plans for those tracks.
Okay.
But the self-storage facility, because of the zoning ordinance requirements, would have to be fenced.
Any other questions, commissioners? Any questions from anyone in the audience? No questions? Do we have any opposition? No opposition, no questions. We'll hear from the applicant.
Madam Chairman, members of the commission, I represent the applicant. Want to address just a couple of things on the binding elements. The reason for is I think it's been clarified, Commissioner, but our requirements were not as stringent as what planning and zoning requires now. So when we met with the staff, they said, would you remove that? And we gladly did it. So that's the reason for that. It's not a lesser requirement, it's more of a requirement. We're going to have a fence all around the storage. The light industry in the back, what our goal is really to have self-storage there, but we want to utilize the property while we have it now. And I'll give you an example. The applicant is the same person that has the self-storages on Three Springs Road that have been there for some period of time. So if you want to see what past experience has done and what he's done with self-storage, that would be the idea. It is built to expand. So we want to utilize the land, and it would be RVs, boats, things of that nature for a place of storage. This, for lack of a better term, is at the back of the property from an aesthetic point of view, if that does things better. Do want to make one mention about the wetlands, although it hasn't come up. That will be our drainage area. So we're not going to be doing any development on the wetlands. On the green space, I can only answer it this way. This is the best way we could develop it, and green space we didn't think need to be utilized there.
David, if more storage units are built, the fence will go around it also.
So, oh, yeah, and that's a good point. We're required, wherever we have the self-storage under the zoning rules and regulations, we've got to have fence around it. So today, there wouldn't have to be a fence where the boats are, but as soon as we start with self-storage there, yes, we would have to completely fence it.
With regard to the retention that you just spoke about, will that appear on your, let me rephrase that question. Where will that appear? Is that a commitment that we're?
But he wants to know, I have an engineer here, let's bring him up and let him answer.
Your name and address, please.
Michael Doyle, 1608 Single Tree Way.
And you swear to tell the truth?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank
I'm
you,
the
sir.
project engineer on this. Yes, sir.
And so the question is regarding the retention, which is currently a wetland. You're going to convert that wetland to a retention, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and it's going to be located in the same place as the wetland?
That's right. Yes, sir.
Correct? Okay, thank you.
Planning any green space at all? Or is this just going to be a concrete jungle? I mean, you're going to put any trees? You're going to put anything?
We'll have to meet the landscaping requirements. Yes, ma'am.
So just landscaping, but no green space to speak of?
No green space, but landscape.
Anything else?
Madam Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, sir. And I've already called, there are no questions from the audience and no opposition, so I'll ask for a motion. The first one we want to act on is the amendment to the binding elements. That was docket number 2018-06 DP. So I would ask for a motion, and then we'll proceed on with the amendment, the zoning ordinance, zoning request next. So the first is, please, I ask for a motion.
Make a motion to approve the proposed general development plan amendment docket number 2018-06 DP. Based upon the testimony and documents presented in the public hearing, the proposed general development plan amendment is consistent with the adopted Focus 2030 comprehensive plan as demonstrated by the compliance. Excuse me, with the following objectives and action items. LU 1.1.1 TR-2.1, LU 1.1.2, 1.3, NCR 2.4.1, LU 2, LU 2.3.1. Further, I find that there have been major changes of an economic, physical, or social nature within the area of the property in question, and I request the findings of fact and recommendation include a summary of the evidence and testimony presented by the witnesses at this public hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Coppinger. We need a second. Thank you.
Commissioner Madison,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Volkert,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Graham,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Coppinger, Commissioner Clark, Commissioner Balance, Commissioner Martins,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Rich,
Yes, ma'am.
Chair Runner.
Yes, ma'am, and the motion carried, and now we'll act on the zone change request. Ask for a motion, please.
I make the motion to approve the proposed zoning map amendment together with the condition upon the general development plan docket number 2018-19-Z-BG. Based upon the testimony and documents presented in this public hearing, the proposed zoning map amendment is consistent with the adopted Focus 2030 comprehensive plan as determined in its compliance with the following objectives and action items. LU-1.1.1, TR-2.1, LU 1.1.2, LU 1.1.3, NCR 2.4.1, LU 2, LU 2.3.1, ED 3. Therefore, the proposed zoning map amendment is in agreement with the adopted comprehensive plan. Further, I request this motion include the summary of evidence and testimony presented by the witness at the public hearing.
Thank you, sir. We need a second. Thank you.
Commissioner Rich,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Martins?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Balance? Commissioner Clark?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Coppinger?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Graham?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Volkert?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Madison?
Yes, ma'am.
Chair Runner?
Yes, ma'am. Motion carried. Our recommendation will be for approval. Thank you all. Brings us to unfinished business. We are here to hold a public hearing to consider the text amendment of the zoning ordinance to revise Articles 1 through 8 and Appendix A and B. So, here we go. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Chair Runner. So we, as you know, been working on this for a while. We recessed and kind of went over all of the changes that we had proposed last meeting. And this meeting, we are prepared to go through all those again if you would like, but we'll wait and see on that. And I would just want to go over, we had some suggestions, and we want to go over the changes to the changes, if you will. So we've created a second summary document, or cliff notes, if you will, that you should have. It's about, let's see, 4 or 5, actually 3 pages long. And then we have a little presentation that we're going to go over those changes to the changes and see what we've altered since our last meeting. So the first thing here we have with the CDR process, the Comprehensive Development Review process. We talked about how we're creating the process and talked about how we're going to have site plans and talked about how we're going to have a site work permit, but we neglected to address the completion of the site. So just like a building permit has a certificate of occupancy, we now have a certificate of completion for the site work side. So that will be our verification point that we have that will ensure that all of the site work was done properly, since we've separated those two processes out now. So you'll get a certificate of completion on the civil side, and then still get a certificate of occupancy on the building side. So that was added. The second piece of the variance public notification requirements, I think we may have said it in our presentation, but when we look back through it, we just added the clarification that the mailed notices will go out to the boundary of any affected distance that the ordinance calls out for which relief is sought in variances. So, for example, if the distance is 1,000 feet, we'll send it out to 1,000 feet radius. If it's 250 feet, 250 feet, and so on. So it'll be based on whatever that regulation requirement is. And again, that was variance specific that we added. And we left in the other notifications that we went over earlier with the zone changes and so on. So overlay development plan, sign approvals. So our Urban Growth Design Review Board requested that staff be able to have the power to approve signs if in those 2 districts, which is Cemetery Road and Lovers Lane, if all of the guidelines are met that are in the current ordinance. So anything fell out of that, staff would not be able to approve that. But if it met all the requirements, then staff would be able to do a staff approval only of just signs. So that was that change that was added. Also, the Design Review Board, was that last night? Too many meetings. So last night did also pass a motion in support of these changes and wanted to pass that on to you all as well. Accessory apartments, we did add the clarification of the requirement that a caregiver is allowed to reside in the apartment for a resident that requires around-the-clock care. So that was a requirement that was requested, and we did add. Digital billboards, so after receiving feedback on that proposal to allow digital billboards, we've since had a request to remove that language altogether and just not make any changes to that section of the ordinance. And the main reason, I guess, is that no changes to the section was desired over having the conversation of opening back up other changes that have been requested to that section. So we did honor that request and just remove that, so digital billboards is no longer part of the regulations. Variable front yard setback, so clarification was added to find how that variable front yard setback is calculated. Simply measure the average of other buildings on the same block face or adjacent block face if no other buildings there's no other really buildings to use that. Then we added the terms of block and block face in Article 8 in the definition. So that block is simply if you're thinking of a traditional square, it's the four sides create the block, and then each side is one face. So there's four faces on a four-sided block or square. So we've made those definitions too. So currently, we just had the variables yard setback written in the ordinance, but there's really no definition or direction on how you would measure that. So, for example, our front yard setback is typically 25. I think it is 25 feet in all our residential zones. But easiest examples in some of our older parts of town, sometimes the buildings or houses are closer than that 25 feet. So this allows to maintain those building lines down the block and keep those symmetrical and aesthetics the way it was originally intended to develop. Retail drive-through or pickup window. So we talked about last time about the changes to the restaurant, for restaurants and things, for drive-through pickup windows and all of that. But and again, going back through the last round, we realized there's retail type drive windows typically. Liquor store is probably the easiest example when you have the drive-up pickup window. So we've applied those regulations to that as well. Vehicle repair. So we talked last time about vehicle sales based on the gross vehicle weight and the federal highway classifications. Neglected to realize that we forgot vehicle repairs. So we've just copied that over to the vehicle repair place as well. Active outdoor recreation and entertainment. So we added clarification that the 250-foot buffer for outdoor recreation and entertainment is only for uses adjacent to an incompatible use. So, for example, if it's next entertainment venue next to a residential, then you would have that additional 250-foot buffer for that active outdoor space. But if you're commercial next to commercial, you wouldn't need that. So it'd only be those incompatible uses. Something else added, the public notices for certificates of appropriateness. So this would be for our historic districts. Public notice requirements were added for certificate of appropriateness applications. So includes published and mailed notices. Right now it was kind of undefined in the zoning ordinance, although we did publish the notices in the newspaper. So we're taking that additional step on these to notify at least those adjacent property owners, especially in a design review historic area where the property owners would be directly affected, trying to maintain the integrity of that historic district. Development standards for twin homes, townhomes, and patio homes. We added clarification that the 24-foot offset that's required for the front and rear facades of the dwelling units sharing a common wall, that wasn't 24 inches. 24 feet's pretty big. Yeah. 24 inches, thank you. And if you have any questions on that, I think Rachel can expand on that. But it's basically the offset between the individual units has to be 24 inches. So it's just a clarification. Fence standards for corner lots in the single-family and multifamily districts. So we just deleted some redundant language that was from the section pertaining to required setbacks for fences. So it's kind of shortening, and it'll just eliminate the duplication there. We added a definition for lot coverage to clarify that alleys don't count toward the lot frontage requirement, which was already a practice that we do anyway, so it was just a clarification. And then definition of yard. So we talked last time about setbacks going from the side property line, for example, to the foundation of the house. The current ordinance included the eaves, overhangs. So we eliminated the eaves overhangs for the setback. This would just be continuing that concept, exempting eaves from the clear space going up. So it's just kind of further clarification of that concept. Correct. And we found that that's what happens anyway, not to the eaves, so.
Hey, Ben?
Yes, sir.
Has the fire department seen that?
Yes, they have.
Okay.
Fire Department and Public Works has seen that, and so when we run into the fire code or building code, what they have they have recognized that this is an easier way to measure setbacks and do those things. And if you get your structures too close together, which is more of a building code concern than zoning, then you might have to fire rate eaves or soffits or something like that to then achieve that fire rating.
House maybe not, so that you have that. I just want to make sure, clarify that, because I saw that, I was like, that could be an issue.
It is, and some of that is, some of that building code, fire code consideration was in the zoning ordinance and didn't really need to be, so that's why we've kind of removed that, but yes, yeah.
So the thinking is they're going to pick that up with the building permit application, correct?
They already do, and so it was kind of a duplicative review, us reviewing it at our point, whether it be variances or whatever, and then it was reviewed again at the building by really the more appropriate bodies, fire and building officials. So we've removed that out of the zoning and just leave that to the.
Address it for you, Doug? Does that make sense for, is that the same thing you were asking? I knew that's what you were asking.
I guess going along with that, when we see plot plans and review plot plans, the eave overhangs are never shown on the plot plans. And so we're reviewing them based on the foundation location. We have no idea where the eave overhangs are, and it was actually, you asked if building and fire had looked at it. It was a request of the building department that we take out the eave overhang language, so I assume they're okay with it.
So with that, this actually came up today, we had a question or concern that basically says that it appears you're proposing to eliminate Airbnb and similar from the zoning ordinance, basically not allowing them anymore in the community, and that's just not the case. I guess if we have somehow projected that in some way, then I guess we need to apologize, because that's not the case. There's really no change in how this is applied. It's just simply modernizing terminology and using the phrase short-term rentals. So it was even stated to us today that Planning Commission, meaning staff, hates these things and doesn't want them in the community. And all we have ever tried to do is just administer the regulations we have and or suggest changes. So we don't hate Airbnb, so I'll state that, and nor do we just try to carry out the policy that is set by the decision makers. So I'll state that and apologize if we've somehow projected some hatred towards Airbnbs and short-term rentals. So I want to do take a second here and clarify what we are and what we aren't proposing with Airbnbs to hopefully help clear this up. And so we've added clarification concerning short-term rentals, and so we've included that with overnight accommodations, and that includes Airbnbs, HomeAway, VBRO, and other similar rental site where someone would typically rent either a portion or all of their house. And short-term rentals are specifically defined as anything that's less than 30 days. It's been that way for a while. And that's also commonly the way it's defined in many other ordinances throughout our state and others. So typically it's a 30-day, less than 30-day stay. If it's more than 30 days, then it's more of a contractual thing where you have a unit. It's basically how either a lease for a multifamily unit or even a single-family rental, it's more than 30-day stay. So the bottom line is that any current short-term rental that is legal will remain legal, and likewise, any short-term rental that is illegal is still illegal. There's just zero change in the way we apply our current ordinance. Our current ordinance is written still classifies as any short-term stay less than 30 days as an overnight accommodation and is only allowed in certain zones, and I'll get to more on that on the next slide. So Again, it's not no change in the current regulation, only a modernization of terms by introducing the term short-term rental. So we're not, we didn't really call too much attention to this throughout the process because we weren't proposing any changes in the uses and where those uses are located. Well, maybe that's the end. It won't. There it goes. I had 3 of the same slide, evidently.
Ben,
Yes.
what exactly is an Airbnb?
Airbnb is a site or an app that allows anyone to sign up for this app and basically acts as your reservations to rent either all or part of your house. And so you can just load your information in, check a few boxes essentially, and then you set a price, and then you can start taking reservations to rent your house.
It's different than a bed and breakfast. That's not a bed and breakfast overnight stay.
It could be the same as a bed and breakfast. It could be, but it could be slightly different too. So a bed and breakfast sometimes, and there's a whole bunch of definitions in KRS for bed and breakfast. But typically a bed and breakfast, you serve a meal, whereas an Airbnb, it's just a place to stay where you may not, there's really no rules of what an Airbnb and that's just a one app that takes reservations for these things. So that's essentially what it is. So, yes. So the use chart is what we have here before you, and this is what one of the things that we call attention to. And so you see all the different zones, the category columns across the top, the different zones where things are allowed across the top, and then at the bottom of this chart, you see highlighted in red there the overnight accommodations. So we've said short-term rentals are considered overnight accommodations. So it's dwelling units arranged for stays of less than 30 days. So it's the exact same definition that we have now and exactly how we treat these types of short-term stays now, whether it's a bed and breakfast or an Airbnb or whatever. So there's no change. The only change is we've actually added it as a conditional use in OPR. All of the other categories are exactly the same. So we already allow the bed and breakfasts and the Airbnbs and all that in all of our residential zones, including agriculture. So it could be farm stays under the agritourism. It could be a traditional bed and breakfast. Could be a number of things. But all of those are conditional uses. Yes, sir.
Is the city and county requiring business licenses for the Airbnbs?
I don't honestly know. Business licenses are required for Airbnbs, but the question when you start talking about these types of uses is the owners of those facilities reporting it, getting the license? Is tourism sales tax and all of that the room tax being collected? And then, of course, the other piece is, are they in compliance with the zoning regulations?
Because when it comes to us, it's not going to come to us as an Airbnb.
It will come to, yeah, it could. It'll come to us as a short term, because that's just the term that covers everything that is Airbnb and beyond. So it would come to us as staff as a short-term rental. So you want to rent some or all of your house in less than a 30-day stay. And then if you do that, it's allowed as you see, all those residential and multifamily zones, but it's a conditional use. So the reason it's conditional use now, which we could change that at some point if the desire is there, but so you could do this in any single-family neighborhood or any neighborhood in the entire county right now. And so there are some who do not like the idea of a bed and breakfast next to them, or the idea of a mini hotel or continual turnover in the houses next to them. So there's just that balance of concerns that a discussion, I think, needs to have before we would change it. So we were just adding the term in there, but we weren't proposing any changes because we're got a whole lot of other changes here, and so we were trying to stay away from those hot button issues to a degree.
Currently, an Airbnb, bed and breakfast, all of the things here marked as C would, in fact, require a conditional use permit under the current zoning ordinance. Is that correct?
That is correct. Now, there's a few specific use standards depending on which category you fit in, so you might have to have an innkeeper, but that, or something like that, so you either have to live in the house that people are staying in, Bob Newhart, easy example, or if you, they're too young, yeah. Or you have to have an innkeeper can reside, it could be a neighbor, could be somebody across the street. So all of those things would qualify as an innkeeper, and so that's more the kind of that bed and breakfast mold, but it still fits the Airbnb and allows a whole lot more flexibility in how they use that, and gives some, I guess, helps limit some of that absentee owner issues that you sometimes find with these rental units.
So just one last point of clarification, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
If there was no proposed change, if someone wanted to have an Airbnb under the current zoning ordinance, they would need a conditional use permit. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess there's also some concern brought up about, well, maybe we want to change this now. And if we do, that is fine. I think that's a discussion we need to have. But I guess my opinion is that is a much bigger discussion than we could probably have tonight. And I think we would need to bring in tourism and other folks, and they've actually requested that, and we're more than happy to do that. It's just we weren't, I guess, and maybe a mistake on my part or whatever, but there's no change here, so we weren't changing those regulations. So that's why we just didn't have that conversation, but we certainly can follow up with that. So we have a couple of options. We can, obviously one option is to proceed like it is. Another option, we could just do like we did the billboard signs, just remove it out altogether and save it because nothing really changes anyway, so we could save that discussion for a later time and open it up to a greater discussion. Or if we have a proposal to know what the other language needs to say at this point, I think we need to study a little longer, but if we have some other language, we can propose that tonight too and send it on to the legislative bodies and see what they want to do.
So is it your understanding that the concern that has been expressed is because of the additional language?
I think there's, from my perspective, I think there's some misunderstanding and maybe some in what we're doing here as far as just adding the term. In some ways, it's kind of met our intent was to clarify what's allowed and what's not by changing some of this language. So this has been read and people realize that those Airbnbs aren't just allowed by right. That's not a change in our zoning ordinance, but we've changed the language to clarify that, so that recognition is probably to a little higher level now than maybe it was. So
You feel, would it be accurate to say that some of the concern that's been expressed has been from those who have maybe possibly been surprised to find out that that requires a conditional use permit under the current zoning ordinance?
I think that's probably a component of it, but then I think there's also a desire, and here's where the hard part is when you get to planning and decisions, as this board well knows, is you've got that competing interest then of those who feel like they should be allowed by right and want to open that discussion up and change the ordinance to just allow those without any sort of other approvals or consideration. And then there's the other side that we've fairly routinely heard from in our office, especially the last few months, of I do not like those, please go enforce that, and please get them out of my neighborhood because I don't want that next to me. So there's that, those competing forces, and so I think it's just a bigger discussion than what we were intending.
And the tourism board is really up in arms about this, aren't they?
I did, again, the first contact I've ever had from them was 2 or 3 hours ago, this afternoon. And I think that I'm not sure they understand what the current ordinance says and what we're proposing. I think they are definitely in favor of the Airbnbs and the like, for obvious reasons, if they can get the room tax on it.
That's the problem.
Yeah, that's the problem.
You can't enforce it.
You can't force it now, and they're not getting it now, but I think they've made some progress in trying to get that. And then, fortunately here, and it's a very fortunate thing, is then you've got the hotel interests who those are taking rooms away from and providing rooms, and they, of course, do have to pay the taxes and are bound to do that. So
If they report it. Well, not.
Excuse me, when you finish, we'll have comments from the audience and
Yeah.
questions,
I
so
mean, the
just
thing-
hold
I
on
mean,
to that, okay? Please.
Yeah, it's if it's reported.
Yeah.
I mean,
if it's reported, and so they've got to get a business license to be legal. They've got to be in compliance with zoning to be legal, and then tourism then gets that transient room tax. And Vicki Fitch told me today they do not collect that very often. They have a few that they've been successful in getting the room tax from, but the majority they still don't yet.
I just saw where in Nashville they've stopped issuing Airbnb licenses.
Yeah, there's several that are leaning that way, and I don't know that that's the way to go either. I'm just, my suggestion at this point is we need to have that bigger discussion as a community, and the zoning ordinance, again, our changes are not changing anything. That's why we just haven't, I guess we missed that one a little bit. So if we want to have that discussion, if we're fearful of what this actually says, we can pull all of that language out, and that's perfectly fine, because it doesn't change anything for us as staff, because it already says that anything less than a 30-day stay is an overnight accommodation, and that's the way we treat it now, and we'll continue to treat it until the ordinance actually does change and tells us to do that differently.
I agree with you. I think it's for a bigger discussion, because I think if the city and county have to get their arms around what's going on, and which will fall to us for planning and zoning for approving certain uses.
Like I said, we as staff, we don't care. We just carry out the policy handed to us.
I understand. I understand.
That does put the light on it, that the conditional use permit does need to be applied for, and, yeah,
Sure.
that's going to let you know who those people are, where they are, what neighborhoods they're in.
I think the biggest reason behind just trying to change the terminology, like Ben said, it's already defined as if you have a stay of less than 30 days, it's considered an overnight accommodation. But, somebody might get online and read our zoning ordinance and be looking through all the terms, overnight accommodation. They don't see the term short-term rental, and so they might not realize that it's classified as an overnight accommodation. So we were just trying to clarify just the current terminology and make it a little bit more modernized. But like Ben said, we can just pull it and not change anything. So
Through our application process also, we do inform people that they need to go to get a business license and check out the room tax. And of course, Airbnb, when you apply, you have a little checkbox that say, yes, I did this, yes, I did this, but that's as far as it goes.
Well, and that might be something, down the road as new neighborhoods, new subdivisions come online, that as a binding element, that the Airbnb or the short-term rentals are not allowed in those neighborhoods.
We've seen some of that, and then there's a lot of existing homeowners associations that already have that in there, and of course, we don't
Sure,
enforce
you don't enforce
those.
those.
And we've even had some instances where people have come and asked, they were denied. The homeowners association caught wind of it, they pull their application, but then they go ahead and do it anyway, and you see them on there, so, yeah.
But we can go ahead then, if you're finished, we'll get, anything
Yeah.
else from commissioners? We've got some people in the audience maybe that want to make comments or ask questions. Yes, sir? If you just state your name and address, we'll swear you in, and you can make your comment or statement.
My name is Ronnie Atkins. I live at 2430 Russellville Road.
You swear to tell the
I
truth.
swear.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah. I just heard about the Airbnb thing as far as in y'all voting on stuff tonight, today. I've actually owned several Airbnbs, not here locally, but in Louisville. So, and I plan on doing a few here. So I just got a text like an hour before the thing saying, you need to be down there because they're going to vote on it or whatever. So I just want to come down and see kind of what y'all were proposing, what was going on. And I didn't figure, probably a lot of people don't even know what Airbnb is. Like, you didn't even know. Most people haven't heard of it. Basically, it's an app where you can rent your place out, apartment, whatever. It's nice because you rate people. So, like, if you want to rent my house, you message me on the app and say, I need to stay. This is why I'm coming to Louisville. I'm going to a concert or whatever. And I approve you to rent my place. So once you rent it, I leave a feedback on you. So communication, how you left the place and all that. So pretty much everybody, I've been doing this for over a year and a half. I've only ever had one person that didn't leave my place spotless, took care of everything. So, you know, it makes a difference. The reason hotels and stuff don't like it, and far as tax goes, that does come out. It's all done through the app, that is paid before I get paid. So if I charge you $100 a night, then
Not here in Bowling Green, it's not being paid.
it is in the state of Kentucky.
It's not in Bowling Green. I'm telling you, just because I know some of the discussions from the tourism board is they cannot get their arms wrapped around how to collect this tax. I mean, they're collecting maybe 2 or 3 nights a month, and they know, if you can go online, you can see how many houses in Bowling Green are doing Airbnb.
Right.
So I'm not saying in Louisville you're not. I'm just saying here in Bowling Green, they either don't have their arms around how to collect it yet, or something, or people are doing it without the correct business licenses.
Because it files a Kentucky
That's the-
hotel tax.
Yeah, that's the sales tax and the state hotel tax, but it
Right.
doesn't collect the local
So we
transient
have,
room
we have
tax
a
that the
local,
tourism
we have a local
Okay.
tourism tax here in Bowling Green that all the hotels pay every time you rent a room. And so that is the problem. Is from the city and county's perspective, they're not capturing all the taxes that need to be captured in the city, from what I understand.
Right. Yeah, that would just have to be worked out with Airbnb. I mean, I'm sure they'll have that, you know, because even the state tax didn't come into effect until probably 8 months ago or 10 months ago. That was, of course, you know, file a 1099 or whatever to yourself. But now that's all done pretty much automatically through the app itself. But yeah, I'm for Airbnb. The only thing that I know that does hurt some is in bigger cities is long-term rentals. Why would you rent your apartment out to somebody that's going to pay $1,000 a month, where you can do it on Airbnb and get $100 a night? So that hurts people that are trying to rent for a long term, trying to rent a year lease or two-year lease. I can see how it hurts that business. But as far as everything else, you know, we have a huge shortage of hotel rooms here in Bowling Green anyway. We got the Corvettes coming in and the Mustangs, everything else. People stay in Franklin and Portland and Nashville, and this way it keeps people in Bowling Green, you know, and keeps, you know, the money local basically.
There's 130 on there for tonight that are available if you wanted to stay.
I rent my house out for typically $100 to $150 a night in Louisville.
I had no idea there was that many.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. There's more. I think that's
People like doing it because it's personal. I'm giving you money for your house. It's always clean. You know, I can look at your reviews. If somebody says, I like this house because it's next to this person. You know, and we walk around the corner. You know, I can go there and eat. You know, so you get a personal feel from it. It's not like a hotel when you got 20 people, 100 people coming through there just constantly, and you got one person that's just going through and making a bed and it's gone. It's very personal, and you respect that person's stuff. So it's, and then you can, like I said, you can rate them, and you can go through and pick out the houses you want and what you want to look at. So.
We also, as a planning and zoning and then as a city, we have to protect our hotels because they pay so much in taxes.
Right.
And I mean, that's a large part of our economy here, and a tax that the city and county collect. So we have to make sure that we're collecting the appropriate amounts.
Right, and Airbnb should pay that. I mean, once you get that worked out, that should be part of the fee.
That's not for me to work out, that's
That would be part of, the city itself working out, or Warren County.
It'd be the tourism.
The tourism, yeah, which I don't see that being a problem. Airbnb's, always been.
Wouldn't that be a code enforcement type situation where you'd have the code enforcement for zoning to go out to these properties? And if there's 100 some odd properties, would
But
that be
well,
city
probably
or
if they don't have
county?
the proper license.
The hardest part is actually figuring out where they are, because if you go on Airbnb and say, okay, well, I want to stay in Bowling Green tonight, for example, Greg just said he looked it up and there's 130. So you go on this site, there's 130 available rentals, and you put in, okay, well, I've got 2 people that want to stay here, and this is the date I need to stay, and it'll pop up a list of all the ones that are available. But you don't actually know the physical address until you book the property. It'll give you a general location to say it's in this general area, but
Okay.
it doesn't have an address or property owner information. So to do code enforcement would be nearly impossible because the
Unless somebody
addresses
turned
aren't
them in.
actually listed until, yeah.
And then they don't get a business license, so the city doesn't know where they're at either, so it makes it difficult to enforce.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. And yes, ma'am, you had. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Debbie Vernon, and I own an Airbnb. Hickory Springs is the name of it, and it's the New Beginnings horse farm that I bought 2 years ago and opened.
To tell the truth.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I pay 4% to the city, 2% to the county every month. I pay 1% sales tax every 3 months. And Airbnb collects the state tax for whomever is going to stay at my home. My thing is that I think everybody should pay tax if I have to.
Yes, ma'am.
And I went through the tourism committee, and they guided me to who I needed to go to for the city and the county. And also, they put me in their booklet to advertise my Airbnb. So it's finding out where these people, everybody is. And I know that's a lot of work, but there's a lot of taxes to be collected because not everybody's going to volunteer for it. So
You
that's,
obtain a conditional use permit to use your property?
I have a business license, and I'm in the county. I have 24 acres. I have neighbors, but distance and everything. So anyway, that's all I wanted to tell you about the taxes.
Well, maybe this will help people be aware
Yes.
that they do have to apply
Yes.
for a conditional use. And at that point, like Mr. Peterson said, they'll be told that they need to make those other applications to
Thank you.
try and get that straightened out. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Anything else? So actually, the part of seems to be the only controversy is this, and that's just a matter of wording. I don't have an issue, I don't know how anyone else feels, of changing that. I agree with you guys that it's a matter of just modernizing what's already stated. So, I don't feel a need. I do think that's something that ought to be on the burner to, whether it's us or someone else, to really get in there and clarify who needs,
think
Mm-hmm.
it's not us,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I think we definitely recognize that
Yeah.
it's an issue, and certainly that we want to talk about changing all of that. One of the reasons we've held off having that bigger conversation is we've done all these other changes, so which is an excuse, I realize, but
No,
also the amount should we have to start enforcing these, being proactive, I guess, instead of right now, it's kind of just the neighbor complains and then we have to, we address it at that point. When 2 years ago, we first looked and identified Airbnb started kind of getting a little more popular. We had, I think, 25 or 30 in the county, the entire county, and now, at one point it was 145, 130, so we're still going up. And you know, if that, we just have that conversation as the community, how we want to handle those. And we just weren't prepared to do that with all these other changes because we've got the comprehensive development review process and all of that. So staff-wise, removing that does not matter because whether that change as proposed goes through or not, we have to address them the same way because that's what the ordinance says. So, but we do recognize that either way, whether it goes through or not, sounds like we need to have a conversation.
Any other questions or comments on any of this? Did you have anything else for us, Mr. Peterson, before we go ahead and move on this?
I think,
Yes.
yeah, I guess if you want to decide whether or
Decide
not
what?
you want to strike that language concerning the short-term rentals out, we can take that, I guess, generic action, generic direction. I don't think we're prepared to strike through all of it tonight, but if we can have that, if that's acceptable, we can make that change. But then before you should have the memo, and then the motion is on that last page 7 that had that motion. So I'll leave it to you all to decide what you want to do.
Okay, we have a decision before us. Do you all want to leave that in with the new terminology that doesn't change our stand at all on the conditional use permits, or do you want to pull the whole thing and leave it as is? It's
I think
somewhat.
y'all leave it in the way that the staff has proposed it, because it modernizes, and we certainly need to modernize ourselves.
Comments? Somebody wants to make a motion?
I think what we've clarified here tonight is this is not a referendum on Airbnb. This
Definitely
is simply a
not.
language change identifying what an Airbnb is, but it does not do anything or doesn't change anything with regard to Airbnb.
From what it was. That's true. I think Ms. Hurt was right. It was just a matter of modernizing what they're called. Everyone feel that way? You want to make a motion, or do you want, we'll leave it as is unless you want to take it out. If you want to take it out, we'll entertain a motion to strike that. No one? Then we're going to leave it as is, and then we do have a motion page to accept the document.
I know you all know this, but just one last comment.
Yes.
So this is just a recommendation that
Yes.
goes before the
Yes.
6 legislative bodies, so they obviously have that opportunity to strike that or leave it or change it if they wish also, so.
Concerning any of it.
Any of it, that's right.
Concerning-
So,
yeah. Yes, thank you, sir. Thank you. Then I will ask for a motion, please.
Make the motion to approve the proposed zoning regulation text amendment based upon the compliance with the process outlined in KRS 100-211, based on the testimony and documents presented at this public hearing. Meaning the proposed zoning regulation text amendment is consistent with adopted Focus 2030 comprehensive plan, is demonstrated by its compliance with the following objections: LU 21, LU 22, LU 22.
Hey.
Yes.
Intent to choose all of the policy plan policies?
Choose all that apply.
Yes.
Would you like to include all of those in your
All
motion?
those, yes.
Yes.
Ms. Martin will do that for you.
Therefore, the proposed zoning regulation text amendment is in agreement with the adopted comprehensive plan. Further, I request that this motion include a summary of evidence and testimony presented by the witnesses at this public hearing.
Thank you, sir. We need a second. Thank you.
Commissioner Rich, Commissioner Martins,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Balance, Commissioner Clark,
Yes, absolutely.
Commissioner Coppinger,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Graham,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Volkert, Commissioner Gay,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Madison,
Yes, ma'am.
Chair Runner.
Yes, ma'am, and the motion carried, and that will be passed on to the legislative bodies. New business. Mr. Peterson, quarterly report.
okay, so we do have a new quarterly report, which you all should have, and I guess I should have, and at this time, I guess it's, we've kind of slowly done this, but we've got a YouTube channel which we uploaded our last planning and zoning meeting to, and this one will be put on there the next day, maybe Monday. So we'll have the opportunity for citizens to go back and review those and no longer have to ask for DVDs. We also, if you search for us on various social media sites, we do have accounts for that now, though we are still learning how to I guess properly use those. Don't have any followers because it's still extremely a few followers, but it's still very new. But we do have a presence now on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn, YouTube, and Google Plus and Twitter. So we've kind of covered the gamut there. We have started posting links to agendas, links to our meetings. So we'll start doing events and other things again. We're trying to be more open and reach as many people as we can. Notifications, we'll start trying to do that some as well. So we're trying to move at least into the 2000s, but hopefully into modern times and proceed forward with that. But quarterly report is out and some very, very interesting numbers there. So the last item, you want to go ahead and handle that one?
Yeah, I can go over this. I forgot it was on the agenda, actually, until just now. But there's a particular piece of property that was zoned heavy industrial back in the early 80s, late 70s. And it was for a junkyard operation. And one of the binding elements stated that once the use of the property for the junkyard ceased, that the Planning Commission would have limited power of attorney to make an application to revert the property back to its original agricultural designation. And so I guess it's been brought to our attention. I think it was for sale, and people have called and said, oh, well, what can I use the property for? And then we looked and we're like, oh, well, it's zoned heavy industrial, but then you pull up the binding elements and basically you can't use it for anything because there's the one binding element that says that that would be the only use, and when it ceases that we would revert it back to agriculture. So I guess we didn't really know how to proceed. This hasn't really come up, and I think you had said, we had emailed back and forth probably 6 months ago about it, and I kind of forgot all about it until the other day. And
What about if we vote just to leave it heavy industrial?
Well, I guess we could do that, but if someone calls and says, hey, I want to move in X, Y, or Z industrial use, the binding elements say that you can't use it for industrial.
So if
Because
Where
it's,
is it?
I think it's on Barren River Road, or does that sound right?
Well,
Or Glen Lily
yeah.
Road? It's somewhere out that way.
Yeah, I think the other thing is the binding element, so it limits it to a junkyard only. So they would at least have to come back in and do a min binding element. So we can leave it sit.
And why wouldn't you just leave it sit, and if somebody wants to come back here and redo the binding elements, and they just do it at this forum?
But
I guess-
when that happened, I mean, wouldn't it have to be whoever owned it?
Not necessarily, and Hamp's fixing to say something too. We already have a clause in our zoning ordinance that says the planning commission can initiate a zoning reversion after 2 years if the property didn't develop
Yes,
as it
I-
is. Now, as standard practice, we haven't done that. But you do have the power to do that by the zoning ordinance. So this one's just a little different because the power of attorney thing.
Bringing it back to
Agriculture.
Ag, yeah, so you
The
can
new
do that
owner
with
would have
any
a-
application,
then the new owner could come and be heavy industry or whatever.
be a new application, right?
Which I guess the other thing to consider would be the future land use map for that property, access to infrastructure. So for example, the property is not served by sewer, the future land use designation is agriculture. The property hasn't operated as an industrial use since 2006, I think was the last time it was apparent on the aerials. And so the binding elements said that once the property would cease as that specific junkyard use, that we would revert the property. So I don't know if,
Well, I think that's what we should do, and then whoever buys it then should come and apply for a land use and a the different things that they need to do, I think it should go back, just as it is stated. Hamp, is that illegal?
Oh, no, ma'am, that's,
Sound
with,
like a motion's been made.
that's within your power.
I mean, a motion?
That limited power of attorney make a difference, Ham?
I think there are two concerns. One is if the current property owner decided tomorrow to reopen as a junkyard. Do you want that to happen? Maybe the property owner has a right to do that. Maybe that right's been lost because it's been inactive for a number of years. I'm not sure what the answer to that is.
Has there been any conversation with the current owner?
There were emails I think it's sold already, since the previous property owner had contacted us about the heavy industrial designation, because I was going back through my email history, and I guess at that time we had sent her the binding elements and said, well, even though it's zoned heavy industrial, this binding element here says that when the use ceased, it would no longer be used for industrial and would revert back to agriculture. And she wasn't able to verify when the use specifically ended. I think it was her father that was operating the business. But then we went back through aerials, and the last time we saw any evidence of the industrial use was in 2006. And so,
Parcel to be sold as a big of a boat. I mean, the current owner, are they of the opinion that they have a heavy industrial?
that I'm not sure of. The question I had the other day was actually about building a home there, which is not actually permitted in heavy industrial. So that's kind of on the
If you had a
total
second
opposite
concern
end of
that you
the
were gonna
spectrum,
mention,
so.
was
Well, the
that,
second concern is that anytime the planning commission undertakes to downzone a piece of property, you subject yourself to the argument that you have deprived the property owner of value. There's a legal term called reverse condemnation. And, you know, this is a completely theoretical, off the top of the head sort of discussion that I'm having, but I think you really ought to be careful about whatever you do, and probably, I don't think you all want to make a decision tonight. You're just kind of asking for some direction about whether the commission wants you all to revert it, and
I think the other piece too, the binding elements, probably covers that second thing pretty easily, because that's the
Right.
reason we record binding elements, is so the buyer beware. So when you do buy the property, title search, the binding element comes up, so you know what you can use, your additional restrictions that may be on that property, and you have the opportunity to amend those binding elements in a form of a public hearing or rezone or any number of options there too, so.
Mr. Peterson, right.
Do you think it would be appropriate if we just tried to contact the current owner and see if they would support us filing that application?
Billy, have you received a complaint?
No, I just had a call the other day about wanting to build a home there, and then I told them it was zoned heavy industrial, and residential property or residential structures are not allowed in heavy industrial,
They
and
wanna rezone.
and so they may actually want to rezone the property.
Think
And
that,
it's reasonable to assume that the phone call was generated from the owner of the property?
It was from the surveyor who was trying to prepare a plot plan, and then that's when I pulled up the property, and I was like, oh, this looks familiar. And because it was zoned heavy industrial, and then the light bulb came on about the email several months ago. So,
Was there a way to check business records to see when they last had business taxes and everything on there? Research that
we looked through
with
the
the
business,
county or city?
Business directory, we looked through,
but they ended like
kinda ended.
09 or 2010, so.
But sometimes people continue. The business directory is not a good reflection of that. It usually takes them a couple years to catch up. That's why we reviewed the aerial photography easily.
I didn't know if
The property was clean by 2006, so
taxes
it's
and
easy to
things.
tell.
I
Yeah.
don't understand why we just wouldn't let it sit until somebody wanted to purchase it and bring it to,
Well, it's been purchased, that's the problem.
well,
She
but,
said-
but obviously the people who purchased it want to put a house there, so they still, it's not zoned correctly, so they're going to have to bring it here, and that's when you could clean it up.
What I hear the staff saying to you, if somebody comes in tomorrow and wants to put a junkyard there, the response is gonna be, I'm sorry, that use ceased, and therefore the right to conduct that use there is no longer available.
You could bring it back here and get zoned back.
Amend the
That's
binding
right.
elements to revive it,
That's
so to
right.
speak. Or if you want some other use, like residential, you'll need to have a zone change for that purpose.
Does
Is it
the
reverted
limited
back?
power of attorney stand right now? Is
Well,
it
the
active
limited
right now?
it is, but it really, that stands for for the same power that you have right now anyway.
Okay.
Which.
Doesn't change it then.
It just says that the property owner gave the planning commission the right to revert it. The statute gave the planning commission that right, so it's duplicative.
Do I understand that it's simply a right? It isn't something that we have to do?
No, it's not something we have to do. It's just that the binding element said we would do it. We will do it, and we have power of
that's
attorney to
different.
do it. So that's why we're bringing it to you. It's because and so we're just saying, we can continue to let it sit, or do you want to, is really what we're asking.
So the binding elements say the planning commission has the right or can revert it back to ag, and if we revert it back to ag, then the person can build a house on ag, residential on ag.
If they wanted to do that, we would probably.
I will say that the property, the majority of it is zoned agriculture, so they could probably just build it a little further over. They don't have to build it in that specific location, but it is kind of misleading, because if somebody pulls up the zoning map and they're looking for industrial property and they're like, oh, this is zoned industrial, and then they call us and we pull up the binding elements and we say, I don't know. It's
Well, why don't we contact the property owner and try to do that, and let's do that first, and then we'll report back to you. Yeah, the binding elements say we do, so that's the reason we're asking. It's different than just a normal reversion.
Okay. Anything else? Newsletter emailed to everyone, okay? Okay. Commissioners, do you have anything? Nothing? Thank you all, and the meeting's adjourned. Thank you.